All right, everybody, Isaac Anderson here with Bound Social, connecting brands to buyers. I'm very excited to have Dino and a killer group of panelists joining us here today. Dino's going to be sharing on some of the top sales drivers for CEOs that run the sales team. And I have a lot of friends who are business owners, so I'm very personally excited to hear these, to be able to help them be successful. So Dino is going to be presenting here in just a minute. And before I turn the floor over to Dino, let's do an introduction here with Dino and then our panelists. So Dino, I'll have you start, and then I'll just kind of go from top to bottom. So Dino, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. I'm Dino Skerlos. I'm a fractional VP of sales with Sales Acceleration, focused on helping CEOs of small to medium-sized businesses scaling and growing.
Dino, awesome. Excited for your presentation. Bill Butler, you're up.
Thanks, Isaac. Hey, nice to be here today. My name again is Bill Butler. I'm the CEO and founder of a company, Journey DXP. After kind of a long career in sales, selling and building teams, I decided to build a technology really designed for salespeople to help them move into the digital age. We call our product the Smart Room.
Love it. Michael, you're up.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Isaac. I'm Michael Nolan. I'm a fractional head of sales. I work with small and medium-sized businesses to help them solve their sales challenges and problems to build a sustainable long-term growth, revenue growth engine.
Awesome. Excited to hear your thoughts on Dino's presentation. John, who are you?
Thanks, Isaac. John Ziegler. I'm the CEO of a company called Aclaro Growth Partners. We're a growth strategy consulting firm that services the ecosystem of middle market M&A, primarily for private equity funds and investment banks.
Awesome. I'm sure you have some really interesting stories, I bet, to bring to the table here from Dino's slides. All right, Dino, well, the floor is yours. Why don't you take it from here?
Sure. All right. Thanks again, Isaac. Right. So what I've been tasked with here is to kind of kick off the discussion with the panel group. And just to give a little context, as a fractional VP of sales, a lot of times I'm the first sales leader a company is going to have. And the reason that becomes significant is because being a fractional sales leader, it's kind of easy for a small to medium-sized business to have a fractional sales leader be their first sales leader. So I get to see firsthand some of the struggles that a CEO has in terms of when to hire their first sales leader. A lot of times that's a more challenging decision than even when to hire their first salesperson. So today what I'm going to do is kind of focus this, and we'll focus this whole discussion targeted to those CEOs, focused on them and how we can help them, assuming they're managing a sales team. So this isn't so much about when to hire a sales leader, more how do CEOs more effectively manage their team. So I put this into a top 10 list, and I figured I'd put them in order of things that when I get into start working with an organization, some of the things that I see that are missing, and some of the things that maybe a CEO can adopt and kind of help them to manage the sales team. Now, a disclaimer, I realize that a lot of these, not all of the top 10 list here is going to be applicable to every organization and every CEO. CEOs have a lot going on, needless to say. So hoping that there's one or two ideas here that they can implement into their managing teams. In fact, I'll be curious to hear how Michael's top 10 list might change a little bit based on what I show here. So let's start with number 10 here. So now again, this is kind of in order of importance. So number 10, creating a detailed sales business plan is something that can be very effective for a CEO to help them manage a sales team. So there's one thing that I realized very quickly in my sales career, that it's very hard to hit your sales targets if you don't have goals up front, right? So putting a business plan together seems like a pretty obvious first step, but a lot of times I don't see this in place within organizations. You know, these sales plans should include things like a team company goal broken down by product, by vertical, individual goals as well for each salesperson by product, by vertical, what have you. In fact, it's a great idea to have the salespeople build their own plans for the year, right? Give them some stake in hitting those goals. Now, as a CEO, you may need to kind of help tweak it. A lot of times a salesperson is way too optimistic or not optimistic enough. So there'll be some coaching opportunities there, but giving them the opportunity to create that plan makes managing them throughout the year a lot easier. And then the last thing on these goals, we've all heard of SMART goals, right? It's really important to make sure that they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, realistic, timely, very important aspects of setting goals. Number 9, conduct an annual performance review. This is something else that I don't see happening too much with small to medium-sized businesses. It should be a habit of sitting down with folks on a regular basis, really every employee in the company, if it's possible. The nice thing is number 10, building a business plan, a sales plan, makes this piece a lot easier to do, especially if they've built the plan, right? So conducting an annual performance review is really important for salespeople. Doesn't maybe change their base salary as it would with a typical employee within an organization, but really important that they understand where you see their progress, where you see them, where they need some help, and kind of getting on the same page in regards to how they're doing. All right, number 8, using a CRM. Now, this isn't the 8th most important thing on the list. It's probably very important. I'm just going to assume most organizations already have a CRM. It just should go without saying it's pretty critical to record the key information within the business, right? How effectively is your sales team inputting information into a CRM comes down to how customized is it, right? Are you getting your unique terms of your organization and terminology into the CRM? That makes it a lot easier for your salespeople to use. And you're looking to really track all information you can, right? The call records, proposals, you need it to be a single source of truth for the organization. And one tip that I would provide, in addition to keeping activity, if you could or have the salespeople get in the early habit of collecting information they're hearing from prospects and customers for that matter. Specifically, what are the problems that we're hearing that we solve for? What are the benefits that they get from solving those problems? These things evolve over time, and it's important for the organization to have that documented. And that's really good information, not only for the sales team to create sales messaging, but also for, if you're product development, if you're a product company, or service delivery, if you're a service-based organization. Number 7, build a pipeline forecasting tool. If you, I guess the easiest way to put this, if you need to spend money in an organization, it's really good to have an idea of what money is going to be coming in the door, right? So having the ability to track, forecast accurately goes a long way into helping the organization grow. The key to forecasting is really being accurate. And there's a couple of things that are still to come on this list will help in accurate forecasting. But the key is consistency. I mean, that's really the key. If you have consistency in terms of what's being inputted, what's being documented, and how everybody's looking at things, forecasting gets a lot easier. All right, number 6. Clearly defined metrics kind of goes hand in hand with having a CRM and forecasting for that matter. Typically, you want to look at leading indicators, right? Give you an idea of what's happening. You don't want to wait for the end of a quarter, the end of the year, and see if you're how close you are to your target. You really need to be able to look at what's happening every day, every week, as it pertains to sales reps' activity on their way to the goal. So how many meetings, how many proposals usually are key indicators. And I'm sure this group has a few others to share in terms of KPIs. So you're just looking to establish what does good look like, what does bad look like. And of course, it's very important that that perception of a CEO and what they perceive to be good or bad is shared so that the sales team knows exactly what's good or bad as it relates to these KPIs. All right, number 5, having weekly sales meetings. This one I don't see it happening too much. Again, time is a big issue here in most cases, right? You really need to have a couple of meetings, right? Sales team meeting on a regular basis where the group's getting together. Those are usually 30, 60 minutes. You're not talking about individual performance, of course, or even individual issues in those meetings. Looking to provide training or group information that pertains to the group in those meetings. Ideally, you have your salespeople actually run those meetings once in a while so that they're responsible for some of the content as well. The one-on-one meetings, probably even a little more important, having those one-on-one meetings on a regular basis. These ideally should not really be about compliance, shouldn't be about, hey, did you hit this activity metric or not? Really should be provide an opportunity to coach, to lead, to help them get to their goals. The more you can focus on that, the better. That's really the start of building a good sales culture. If you can focus those one-on-one meetings and helping them do their job better. No question, you need to spend a little time on, hey, we're missing the mark here, or of course, maybe one meeting dedicated to pipeline review, but having the focus of those meetings being on coaching goes a long way. Which leads into number 4, which is coaching. Now, I was going to have this number 1 because I think this is the one piece that is maybe most important, but and probably doesn't happen as much, only because, again, most CEOs just don't have the time to coach, but really important. But so how do we do this? If you're how often are you in the field with the reps? If your reps are doing virtual calls, that's great. If you're getting them recorded, watching those, one of those every couple of weeks at the very least, if you can watch those, provide some specific examples, do some role playing. All of this coaching is really helping to improve their skill as a salesperson, as well as helping you get closer to your goal. So don't assume each salesperson needs to be trained the same way. A lot of times, different salespeople have different deficiencies or different things they're strong at. So make sure those are, of course, tailored as well. So role playing is a great opportunity to do that. Not every salesperson likes that, and you're not really focused on doing that to catch them in something they're not saying, but really just gives you an idea of what additional training they need and gives you an idea of what's being communicated to the prospects as well. All right, getting down to the top 3 here. Build comp plans that incent the right behaviors. As a salesperson myself, and we're pretty simple creatures, right? A lot of times we're going to focus our activity on what's going to bring us the most revenue or income. So you really want to exploit that as a CEO, and in that, making sure your compensation plan is incenting the exact behaviors you want. So, I guess a pretty easy example is if you have salespeople that are responsible for both growing existing business and net new business, having the same compensation or commission percentage for both could potentially be a problem. It's a lot easier for a salesperson to communicate with an existing client than kind of go up, try to start conversations with new prospects. They're going to gravitate toward what's easy if compensation is the same. The other thing too, another pretty simple example, give higher incentive to your most profitable work. That seems pretty obvious. The other thing too is you with the right compensation plan, you can attract a higher quality of salesperson, specifically if you don't cap it, right? If you provide more incentive for somebody that hits 120% of goal, or 100 to as compared to 140%. If you get the right individual, you're going to have, somebody who's looking to exploit that is what you want, and you're going to have a better opportunity to hit goal if you can incent them to do that. Okay. Number 2, right people in the right seats. Can't help but kind of go to team sports. I played a lot of team sports, and we're talking here today about a lot of things that help in creating a good sales organization, right? If a sports team, if you have good coaching, that helps a lot. If you run the right plays, that helps a lot. But nothing really helps more than having the best players on the field, the most talented players on the field. So making sure you have the right people in the right seats, making sure you're hiring correctly, making sure they're focused, again, back to that example. If this isn't always possible, but if you have somebody that's more focused and has a better ability to work with existing clients, as opposed to kind of that typical hunter farmer mentality, maybe if you have an opportunity to split those, right? Having the right people in the right seats becomes really important. So in hiring the individuals too, really quickly, get really good at understanding what do your salespeople need to do to be effective at their job? What are the attributes that they need to have to be good at so what are the very specific things they do on the day-to-day basis? What attributes do they need to be able to do those well? Get really good at hiring for those attributes. Document them. Maybe they evolve a little bit over time, but the more consistent you are in your hiring process as it relates to those attributes, the better quality individual that you're going to be able to find. All right, drum roll. Number one here. For me, it's having a defined sales process. A typical thing that happens with early stage companies is you tend to hire salespeople that have a lot of experience and then kind of go trust that they're going to go bring in the business based on how they've done that in the past. And that works. It really does, especially if you hire some good people. But the challenge is sometimes they're going about things a little bit differently. For example, how is their first meeting with the prospect being handled? That could be inconsistent if you don't have a documented sales process. When are they introducing pricing into the conversation, right? If that's inconsistent, your process is inconsistent. And if that's inconsistent, well, then everything tends to fall apart, right? How well can you trust your metrics if things are happening inconsistently from the sales team? So having a defined process is, to me, really important. Adding to that, making sure your sale, a lot of us think of a sales process as the stages in your sales funnel or the stages in your CRM. So discovery meeting, scoping meeting, proposal meeting, negotiation, whatever those 5 to 7 stages are, that's typically your sales process. And that works. But then what you want to keep in mind is what's the buying process your prospects are going through. Your prospects, you'll find they're pretty consistent in terms of how they go about purchasing your product or service, right? They're in awareness stage, they're in consideration stage, they're in decision stage. That's pretty consistent. So we want to map our process to that, which means we really want to have milestones. We want to have kind of guardrails, if you will, or specific reasons why you go from one stage to another. So the pricing example, again, what specifically needs to happen in the interaction with your prospect that says, hey, it's time for pricing? Again, the more consistent that is, the more consistent your process is, and the more consistent your metrics are, the more consistent your pipeline and forecasting are, and you're well on your way to scaling the business. So guys, that's my top 10 list. I am sure you have a lot of thoughts. I'm really curious to hear, Michael, from your perspective, if there's anything in the 10 that I didn't cover or anything in particular that you might have moved to number 1, but these were mine. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, hey, Dino, that's a great job. I think all of them that you covered were of a high value to, a CEO. And I think you laid it out, what needs to be done, first, get that sales process defined. And when I think about what you put together here, I thought, how do I want to help your salespeople as a CEO to become successful? Well, salespeople are creatures of habit. They want to understand what they need to do, how they need to act in order for them to be successful within the system. Defining your sales process is the right one. Making sure they have a sales plan so they know what those goals and objectives are. Doing a performance review and making sure it's a conversation, it's an ongoing coaching opportunity, like you said, but also something where it's not a surprise, it's not an event, it's something that goes on consistently. I will say one thing, I love your having a weekly meeting. I think just getting the team involved so they're all communicating, because I remember when I first started out in sales, it was like, oh my God, the phone rang and it's like, the CEO's on the other line and you're like, okay, am I in trouble now? Well, as you get into it, it's a working relationship. And therefore, those sales reps are going to be getting information back to you. I also think the way you laid some things out with the CRM and the forecasting and the clearly defined metrics, that's all if a CEO really looks at it as a way to help the sales team. As a sales leader, as a CEO, as a C-level executive within the company, you're putting what you think based on the data you have at a point in time, the best metrics, the best process for it to happen. Well, let's be honest. Things are always changing. The market's always gone in a different direction. So what might have worked or the process that we thought we might have had set up isn't flowing as smoothly. Then all of a sudden you at least know where it is you can get very surgical in getting that straightened out so you can get the sales team back on track to achieving their goal and feeling really good about themselves. But I really liked it. I think you were so team focused, salespeople focused. That's the right thing for a CEO to think about: empathy and putting yourself in the salesperson's shoes. Really good job.
We've got
Definitely,
a couple of
hey,
experts. Yeah, sorry, Isaac. I'll turn it over to you. We've got a couple of experts here on the panel that are living this day to day. I'd love to hear their thoughts as well.
let's
Yeah,
do this.
this is
Could you jump one slide back, and then I want to
Yeah.
just keep some structure here because you had 10 great points, and just to kind of make sure that we all go somewhere together. Let's just go from your number 1 down to 10, or we'll maybe not get through all 10, but let's just start here and then get everybody's thoughts on each kind of point here. Does that work for everybody? I think that's the best way to make sure that we're all going in the same direction. So for your number 1 here, I'd love to hear maybe Bill, your thoughts on creating a defined sales process. I'd be curious from your work experience, do you find that there was a point in time where it hurt too much to not have a sales process? Any thoughts around that?
Well, I think in terms of, the 10 that Dino put, I think they're spot on. We look at things always from the pillars of, people, process, and technology. And I think you addressed all those, I think, very succinctly. And I think, went into good detail here by kind of, blowing them out a little further with the top 10 list. You can debate which one is, 1 to 10. And, I can spend hours kind of going through that and making cases. But I think process is clearly an element. I think you will see a correlation to companies that have stronger selling processes, have stronger sales success. They're more predictable in what they do. They can invest in the right areas. I think that goes clear. And we've seen that. I think the thing that's changing in the market, and this is kind of our point of view when we think about digital and digital selling, is so much of our sales process, and Dino talked about this, has to engage the buyer. The buyers are changing. They're becoming digital. They're scrolling. This is the TikTok generation. They're consuming information at breakneck paces, and they want things quickly. They may not be as patient as someone goes through a somewhat methodical, call it a traditional sales process. So what we try to do is we try to encapsulate all that into a buying experience that lets the buyer drive the activity as fast or slow as they want, but with very defined steps along the way. We have different personas. We may have a executive team, operational team, business team, financial buyers, technical buyers, et cetera. We got to engage all them. We don't want to do it serially and do it point to point to point. We'll want to try to engage them as quick as possible and accelerate that buying process, which accelerates our sales process. So I think a lot of it fundamentally comes down to a well-articulated sales process, that can engage customers and really shorten and make the sales process much more predictable.
John, do you have any thoughts on number 1?
I agree with everything everyone else on the panel has said. We're a really big believer in process. We're also a big believer in your process can and should change as the environment changes. The 1 meeting a week thing it really held true to us. We actually have a quarterly meeting where we talk about, should we make changes to forecasting, to sales goals, to who and what we're targeting from a service perspective. Keeping that flexibility and agility open for us is a really big piece to how we go about engaging in our process. So 100%, I couldn't agree more with your 10. I might reorder them, but year to year I might change the order as well. So just
I would agree.
John, I have a follow-up question for you. So since you're dealing with investors and M&A risk reduction, do you have any thoughts or stories around if an organization does not have a defined sales process, how would that negatively impact maybe their evaluation or someone who's interested in acquiring them? Do you have any thoughts around that?
So if they don't have a clearly defined sales process, they're gonna struggle. However, I'll put it this way as well. You're a private equity investor, which is a big piece of our client base, and you find a business that has succeeded without having a clearly defined sales process, you're going to jump all over that investment.
That's true.
You possibly can, because once you give them a sales process and they start getting, and I call it basic blocking and tackling, they start really engaging in the process, that business becomes exponentially more valuable. So we keep our eyes open for that as well on a regular basis.
I
One
was
thing I
not
have on this,
expecting that.
I guess I have a question, John. So you acquire someone who does not have a sales process. Obviously, am I understanding that you guys are instilling a process with them?
We're not. We're evaluating that business. Our
Okay.
client is investing in them. And I always use the analogy of you have two guys running from home to first, and they both get there at the same time. One of them has terrible form, one of them has perfect form. As an investor, you want the guy who has terrible form because you teach him a little form, he's going to get there a hell of a lot faster.
Absolutely.
Right.
one of the things I can add, you asked about stories here in sales process. This is something one of our clients did recently. And, because what we do with smart rooms, often our clients, if they go to market by industry, they'll create like a smart room template by industry, and they'll invite customers into their unique experience. So they were selling into the healthcare market, and they looked at 3 identical customers in the healthcare space, selling the exact same product to the exact same kind of buyers. And one of the things they realized is that each organization buys very differently. And what they concluded with this is that often it's the strength of the personality. Or events that have occurred in the company that's driven them to look at certain things more. For example, they said one of them, had some type of data breach. So they spent a lot of time drilling down technically. The technical team was all over it. That's the key gate they had to get through. Another team had a new CFO came into an organization. So they're spending a lot of time looking at ROI models and seeing what the true payback on these investments were. They all go through the same gates at some level, but the level of detail in terms of getting closure at each one of those stages became critical. And a lot of it depends on the organization and ultimately what their goals are and what the personality types are of the different buying personas.
Excellent insight, Bill. Let's move on, even though this is so much to talk about for the sales process. The right people in the right seats. Michael, do you have any thoughts or high-level commentary around right people?
This is definitely there, especially when you look at outside versus inside, hunters versus farmers. It's just human nature. People are wired differently, and there are certain skill sets that you need in order for you to be successful. Someone who's out there continually putting themselves and driving, willing to open conversations and have discussions, they probably make a pretty good hunter. But if there's those people sometimes I take a look at and I'm wondering, okay, are you good with the details? Are you good with filling out the paperwork? Are you good with following up on some other things? Sometimes those people aren't so good, but that's what makes them very good hunters. Whereas you get to a certain point when the business becomes established and it's more management versus developing, you then move them to another person. The same with the inside versus outside. Totally different skill sets, and getting the right people in the right seats. It goes back to getting them in the right environment and setting the right playing field so that they can be successful at their jobs, not only for themselves, but also for the company.
Yeah, one thing,
I for you.
I was going to say, this was one of the biggest learnings I had when I became a first line sales manager a few decades ago was mistakes hiring. I think most CEOs, sales leaders, first time through, this is the biggest mistake you have. And what I actually learned it from a consultant, was that you have a tendency to hire people you like, and salespeople are very likable. But the hardest thing is finding out, as Michael mentioned, are they wired for a hunter or a farmer? And you can't tell that necessarily in an interview. So I actually began to I got introduced to this company that does this specifically for a living. And they basically look at 4 major traits: dominance, extroversion, conformity, and patience. And they basically look at people and they'll map you. If your dominance is the highest trait of your personality, you're a hunter. If dominance is second and extroversion is higher, you're a great account manager. And they have a whole analysis of how people matrix out. And the interesting thing is I cheated a few times on that. I found people that I liked, and they looked like a farmer, but I had a territory that was a hunter. And I said, let me see, I think this person could do it. Invariably, they failed.
And
Wow,
building on that point, Bill, I think when you're looking to hire somebody, using an assessment, a lot of CEOs will be like, yeah, I don't need that. Does that mean I'm admitting that myself and my team can't interview well? It's not. Here's the thing. Interviewing a person for 1 hour, you're getting a 1 hour snapshot into them. If this gives you another layer of getting to understand a person, again, it's setting up your company and then also that person for success. So it's incredibly critical. But I just want to, emphasize assessments are a really good tool. Find the right one for you and your team, what fits your company well, and use it and make that part of your hiring and onboarding process, because it does give you the benefits. Are they in the right seat? Where are the skill sets and what do I need to build around that person to allow them to be successful? And then how do I immerse them into the culture of my company to make sure that they become a contributing team member and just not an individual player?
Yeah, what I'd add there is I agree with all of that. It's just building on what I mentioned when I was talking to the slide. Understanding the specific attributes for the individual is critical. And also what I find is critical is realize that the first time you map that out, when you take your existing salespeople that are very strong, that are good, even mediocre, and you map out their attributes, you're going to be wrong the first couple. I mean, it takes a number of iterations to kind of figure out what the attributes are of the individual that's going to help somebody succeed at a particular job within a particular organization. The two attributes that I think are the most underrated, because we've touched on here, right? Your extrovert, dominant, those are kind of the ones that you think go to the top all the time. Actually, what I find is coachability and empathy are the two attributes that carry across success for most organizations that I work with, which probably would have surprised me a lot of 10 years ago. But whatever they are for your organization, kind of it's like mapping them out, understanding them, measuring them, and then making sure that the 2, 3, 5 people that are interviewing that candidate within your organization, make sure they're all interviewing, their questions are based on those attributes. There has to be consistency in the interview process as well. Make sure it's scored, make sure that you're focused on the attributes to find the right person.
I would add emotional intelligence is a big one that we use. And another, we loosely use assessments, but one of the things that we do is we have members of our team that have been on the other side of the table with us. So we introduce them at the last stage of the interview process, and they play the role of the client. And our clients can be super tough, as you can imagine, from a private equity and investment banking. And they serve as that really tough, are you going to be able to make it through this conversation type person? And that gives us an idea of whether A, they fit those attributes, and B, where they would fit within the organization. That's a tool that we use as sort of the last gate to get through the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great insight, John. Dino, should we move on to number 3?
Yep.
Building comp plans that incentivize correct behavior. A question for you, Dino. This has been brought up the other day with Scott and Jim, actually. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you have any thoughts around how frequently you should overhaul your comp plans for your sales teams?
Well, overhaul changed my answer mid-sentence. So comp plans to me need to be understood. They need to be simple enough to be understood. They need to be incenting the right behaviors. They do need to change, in my mind, in most cases, on an annual basis. Overhaul, you'd overhaul it when if I walk into a bad situation or a situation with a bad comp plan, I'm going to overhaul it. But from there shouldn't be much need to overhaul unless we're adding some significant component to the comp plan, right? We're going new product or new prospect, we're going after a new type of prospect. There might be a situation where it's overhauled a little bit, but the hope is that you should put the mechanics of the comp plan, once you've kind of gone in there and you changed it once, it should stay the same in terms of the whole structure. Now, levers, you're changing levers on an annual basis, but the overhaul is, I guess you threw me a little bit with that word. The hope is you wouldn't need to overhaul it on an annual basis, but you would need to change it on an annual basis for sure.
What about this, Michael? Curious to hear your thoughts, because I know that you see a lot of comp plans. When you first engage in an organization, and I know Dino was like overhaul, bad word, but if you do have to make drastic changes, I'd love to hear why you need to do that and any examples.
Yeah, I think when I do it, I agree with a lot of what Dino said, but building and answering on your question, when we originally engage, there's sometimes we walk in where the comp plan is not aligned to the behaviors that we're looking to do for the sales team or the company to be successful. For example, I've gone into one where it was 90% base and 10% incentive. And the CEO kept asking, I got a couple of guys who've been here forever, but I can't attract and hire new ones. Well, most salespeople really want to be incentivized, want to really be able to understand the comp plan clearly so that they can maximize their earning potential within that. Now, from that standpoint, we would go in, to your point, it might qualify for an overhaul. The optimal that we're seeing is probably about a 50% base and 50% variable compensation tied to the on-target earnings, minimal on-target earnings that we're looking for, and then move from there. I also look if there's no leading indicators within the variable or the goal part of the compensation plan. I believe that there should be a balance between the lagging indicators, maybe revenue, new, etc. But then also what are some of the leading indicators that need to be in there, such as, new customers acquired, conversion rates, something like that, that ties into their month in and month out performance.
That's great information. Bill, do you have any insight you'd like to share?
Yeah, the only thing about comp plans is I agree with everything that people said. I think part of it is it's the downstream of good planning and to some extent even good execution. So you may tweak it along the way, but I think it's a big function of getting the upfront planning right. And then I think the compensation has a tendency to kind of follow suit.
I will say this, Isaac, to jump back one more and, trigger it off here. The leadership within the organization should be looking at the comp plan every year. And the reason I say that is if your goals as an organization should change, you need to reflect that into your plan because you're going to be asking your people for some sort of activity. You need to make sure that you're aligning that compensation to the activity that you're asking them to do. So it should be looked at every year and make sure that that alignment is still spot on. And if not, tweak it and move from there.
John, do you have any advice or experience you'd like to share?
I couldn't agree more with Michael on that front. I mean, we try to look at the comp plan as a component of growth strategy and business planning over in the given year. And then do we think we're going to be looking at something a year down the road, 2 years down the road that we might want to look at then as well? We're always trying to be forward looking with that piece of it's a big expense. So we want to look at it that way.
Yeah, great insight. All right, Dino, did you want to add any cherries on top before we go to number 4?
I don't think so. Let's go to 4, coaching.
All right. So Dino, did you have something? I saw you started.
I'm ready to be prompt. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
like I was saying, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. There's a lag on my end. Take the floor button.
Yeah, I think, like I said, this was one that I was thinking about moving up a little bit higher. Coaching is, just ties into everything, right? We're talking about hiring the right people. Keeping the right people really comes down to the amount of time you're spending with them and spending that time in a way that is beneficial to them, not only beneficial for them to hit their goals within your organization within that year, but are we looking at coaching them in a way to make them better salespeople that will help them get an advance in their career, even if that means eventually being at another company other than ours? So coaching is a mindset as much to me as what you're doing on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis in this regard, a mindset in that, are we fostering a culture of improvement, of momentum, and of bettering ourselves individually so that we can, as a company, get better on an annual basis.
I couldn't agree more.
Insight,
it's that continual learning piece that we continue to talk about. Is salespeople they find who are naturally inquisitive, who want to learn and better not only their customers, their prospects, but also themselves, tend to be the best part. But sometimes also they need the coaching on it. And it also helps to get the salespeople out of the day-to-day churn that they're in. Because the last thing you're going to do is take care of yourself. So if you don't give them that opportunity to help and develop and sharpen their skills, they may not necessarily do it. And so it's a great opportunity for you to sit down and be in the trenches, rolling up the sleeves, working side by side to them, to know that you're investing in as much into them as you are into the business.
Yeah, one of the things too, I think what you see in today's world, which is different. When I got into sales back in the day, I went through a very extensive sales training program with a large corporation, 6 months before you actually got out to the field. You don't see that anymore. That investment isn't happening. you kind of cut your teeth in the SDR or BDR role, which in many ways, those skills don't align that well with what you expect out of a sales rep and a good account manager. So, coaching, I think, is more critical than it's ever been to help develop young talent to learn how to sell. In some cases, it's mentoring too, and there might be a difference. Does the sales manager actually make the best coach, or should it be someone who's not the sales manager and independent, who's seeing it a little bit more objectively and trying to help them develop their skills? We've tried a few different things like that over time, and I think one of the things we find consistently is the sales managers are usually under pressure to do certain things that are trying to drive certain behavior, close more deals, bigger pipeline, whatever it might be. And they're missing out on the opportunity to truly coach people on skills, on, understanding what they're good at and what they're not good at. Sometimes an independent, another sales manager or someone else in the organization is actually a better coach or mentor than the sales manager.
I would add, I think mentoring is as, if not more important, particularly in our business where everything is relationship based. And so we spend a lot of time, I don't take a sales call. I lead our sales organization. I don't take a sales call without one of our sales team members with me, and accomplishes a few things, but it gives them the opportunity to see how I would lead a call and how I would take advantage of certain things that happen during the course of that call. It also gives me the opportunity to get their feedback. I want to hear what they heard and what they think were either missed opportunities or things that we did well on that call. That gives them the opportunity to not feel like they have to be on all the time. They can be a participant in the call and add value, but not necessarily have to be the only person adding the value throughout that process. It also gives us the opportunity to take people that are, say, engagement director level at our business, who I consider to be just as important in the sales process as our sales team. It gives them the opportunity to develop into a successful sales rep moving forward. So we use mentoring probably, I don't know what number to put on it, but we use it a lot more than we use coaching from the definitional perspective.
All right, I have a story and a question. So a couple of years ago, Monty and I were working with a very large international, like multinational retail company. And I was chatting with their main sales enablement guy internally. And one of the biggest challenges that we were encountering was they had a couple top performers who were so unteachable. And so I would love to hear, what do you do when you have a high performer who culturally is just a little bit arrogant and kind of a bad apple? What would you do in that situation?
I got a funny story on that too. I had a CEO years ago, and the top sales rep was a royal pain in the ass, and the CEO hated him because he was constantly disrupting things. And that's part of that, an assessment is they look at conformity and patience, and generally, they can have very low conformity and patience. And coming in, this person is going to require a lot of hand-holding to keep them kind of from disrupting the whole organization. And he mentioned to me, he goes, you got a bucket bronco there. He said, how do you tame him? I said, I just make the paddock bigger. So I said, I don't know if they are, trainable per se. You try to, and maybe it's coaching and mentoring and things like that. But, there's a tolerance level when you have top performers and they know they're the top performer. They feel like they can, request lots of things, that demand more things, et cetera. And you got to be careful about that. It sets a bad precedent in the organization. You look at, worry about favoritism, you worry about things like that disrupt culture. But, to the best you can, you try to manage them. There's some cases I've had top performers I've let go, really good performers, because of the disruption they've had in culture. So it's always a balance in terms of how disruptive and how much of a nonconformist they want to be.
Yeah, I'll go back
have any advice on what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the team sports analogy, right? You look at professional sports and general managers in football and baseball, they go out of their way to make sure that there's a cultural fit there because it is so critical. And having somebody that is not or detrimental to the culture really just affects the team profoundly. And to the extent that the individual success that person has is just doesn't offset the negativity that they might create. So as Bill said, it's a balance. In most cases, situations I walk into, yeah, there might be a little arrogance from that individual, but usually not to the point where they're disruptive. In those cases, you just, as Bill said, you manage as best you can. You're doing things a little bit differently to manage them potentially, but but you can't be afraid to, let go of a top performer at based on culture. And culture is just too important. Having the team going in the same direction and kind of that momentum that they can create is too important to be snuffed out by one individual, no matter what however successful they might be in terms of hitting quota.
Yeah.
Great advice. John, did you want to add anything to that before we do our
Culture is king. I mean, you have to be willing to part ways with somebody that's a cancer to your culture. I mean, there's really no other option. One of the things that we've done in the past is when we have our weekly meeting, whoever that person is that's being disruptive, they're responsible for leading the meeting, and they have to spend a little more time preparing and being a little bit more empathetic with the rest of the team. And sometimes that helps. It doesn't always, but at the end of the day, if coaching and mentoring and discussing doesn't work, the culture has to take precedent.
Great advice. All right. Hey, we're on the hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Going through your top 10, Dino, we got through 4, but they were the top 4. So I'm glad to see that. I'd like to give everyone the opportunity, though, before we put a bow on it, to give, if there's anything that you were wanting to share on that we didn't get to because we didn't get to the slide. So I'll just go one at a time here. Dino, do you have any kind of final things that you'd want to share leaving us here today?
I guess in the spirit of the topic, I have a lot of admiration for founders and CEOs in general, and for those that are leading the sales team like John and Bill. I just have a lot of respect for what they do, and hopefully some of this advice from everybody is helping another CEO that is in the same boat, that and potentially some of this might help them a little bit. So that's it. Thanks, Isaac.
Absolutely, Dean. Appreciate your passion for helping people. Michael, is there anything that you wanted to share here at the end? Any insights, advice that we didn't get to, since we didn't get through all the 1 through 10?
Yeah, I think one thing, Dino did a great job of laying out a top 10 and to, accentuate on what Bill and John said. Based on your situation, how you align it, how you number it may be different, and that's okay. But I think this gives any founder, CEO, C-suite executive a punch list to check off and to understand what do they need to have in place or think about putting in place before they begin to hire a sales leader. And why I say that is, we all know that hiring a sales leader and bringing that person in is a very expensive proposition that people want to see results on very, very quickly. And if you don't lay the foundation and they have to do a lot of building work versus going out there and selling and getting the business work, it's going to be a challenge to them. So begin to think about where it is. It'll give you an understanding about where the holes and gaps are in your situation, where your new sales leader is going to have to invest their time in order for them to get up to speed and have the team performing at the level that you want them to.
Great advice, Michael. John, any parting thoughts?
This is one of the things Dino and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, is everything that you do in a company should be about selling. From the person that's answering the phone to the person that's executing to the person that's actually out selling. Every email, every document, every conversation is a sales piece, and that's something that sort of comes across in what Dino laid out here, which I think is absolutely spot on. But the underlying piece is you have to have a culture of selling from top to bottom that everybody participates in, and I think that's an important piece that sometimes gets missed as you have people, understanding just their role and not thinking about the fact that they're part of the sales process as well.
That is a great insight. Bill, do you have any final
advice
you'd like to leave us with?
I would say, there is a lot of debate about, is sales an art or science? It's actually both. But I think, what I've seen consistently is the more science that gets applied, it accentuates the art. It makes the art better. I think this top 10 is a great roadmap to begin to implement, the science of selling and work on the prioritization, as Dino has outlined it. And you won't get it right from the beginning. It's an ongoing thing. It's a living thing. You're constantly going to be looking at tweaking and changing and investing and doing certain things. But again, I think, more science is better than less. And again, it doesn't impact the art, it actually makes the art better.
That is very well said, Bill. It's like the framework is flexible enough to empower creativity, but also like give you the structure that you need to keep going for consistency. Very well said. All right, Dino, I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to put this together. I really appreciate it. Very, very well done. John, Michael, Bill, I very much appreciate your time here today.